What is the technology strategy for the U.S. Department of the Air Force? How is the U.S. Air Force leveraging emerging technology such as AI to transform how it does IT? And what is the U.S. Department of the Air Force's Zero Trust strategy? I'll explore these questions and so much more with my very special guest, Jason Bonci, Chief Technology Officer within the U.S. Department of the Air Force. Jay, could you tell us what a day in the life or a week in the life of the CTO for the Air Force is like?
So the principal output of my office, which is relatively small, so I have got myself, a deputy, and some support contractors, as well as support from other folks within the larger SAF CN. That's the secretariat level CIO office. A day in the life is really largely around developing content and helping to hold meetings to be that technical arbiter. So we do a lot of work in strategic communications and in structuring technical ideas so that people can understand where we're going. And this is oftentimes, 4-hour blocks where we are, for instance, working through the network strategy. So a huge chunk of my week last week was saying, all right, let's get the words in place that describe where we're going for an overall network strategy. And then we can start to link that towards our zero trust efforts, to where we're going with SIPRNet, right? And where, right now we're doing budget certification and budget processes. We need to, for our work with DoD CIO, talk about how we're coming together for the next generation of our secure networks. And so it is us telling the story about where we think we should be going, the types of technologies we need to be going after, and the changes to delivery models that we think will build a better secured network in the future. And so it's developing that content and then doing the education for folks about what that content means and helping them contextualize it to the various efforts. So I've got a couple of specific areas, ICAM, some of our base infrastructure modernization, so our next generation networking pieces, some of the zero trust elements that I spend more time on day to day. But largely it is it's content building, right? It is being that technically informed strategic communications author as we pull together the messaging coming out of the Office of CIO.
With the speed of technology and what you're doing at Air Force, getting that messaging right and making it digestible, it's got to be sort of a challenging experience to do that. I was wondering, maybe what are some of the challenges you're facing in fulfilling the leadership role you're in right now?
The challenges are largely just the sheer scale of the Air Force, right? And trying to figure out how you can get a message about where we are going. There's such incredible demand for change and progress. And this is one of the wonderful things about the Air Force in particular, right? The one thing I heard, it might have been from a book, I'm not exactly sure the source, but there is this concept that the Air Force is culturally built on top of wielding technology for military purposes, right? Flight wasn't a thing, right? And conversely now space wasn't a thing, 100 years ago or 200 years ago, right? When we initially put together these structures. And so as we have matured and as we have built a culture that is around adapting and iterating over technology, our culture is a reflection of that. And the progress demanded by those cultural implications and the way that we even as a service, the way that we argue about ideas and the way that we argue about technology are unique because of that cultural underpinning. And it is difficult to make sure that you are talking to the whole Air Force. It's difficult to understand the perspective of so many different types of personas. So we have, our cyber operators who key in on certain things. We have our intelligence community that finds certain things important. We have our budgetary folks and our Pentagon leadership that also have different incentives. And, one of the things for me, not being in the Pentagon, is I try to be out of the Pentagon bubble. And that also allows me to not be as responsive to Pentagon demands for time or get, tacked on to various meetings just to fill a seat, and allows me to really focus on the content. But what that means is I try to have a larger perspective around what the field needs. And that means making sure that I maintain those contacts with people who are doing the delivery or who are in our combat MAGCOMs or folks who are in our acquisition department to get that kind of day-to-day delivery challenges. So you can take those snippets, right? So I think the joke is the plural of anecdote isn't data, but it does allow you to pull together a sense of what is going on to be able to tell that narrative either for improvement, for communication, or to be able to give leadership the opportunity to lead in and change some of the delivery environment. So the scope is unlike anything I've ever dealt with before. It's been a fabulous challenge. And it is really kind of the defining reason for why I kind of took this position, right? This is the thing that I came here to learn and the thing that I came here to improve at.
I was hoping maybe you could delve a little deeper into the strategic technology vision of the Air Force that you see, the narratives that you're talking about and how you're communicating those, and maybe highlight for us maybe some of your key strategic priorities of late.
So what I would say is the broad arc of technology for the Air Force, we can kind of place this into two broad buckets, right? So there is the airframe side of the world, right? The kind of hardware basis of the Air Force, and the goal there is to continually develop and deliver these major platform capabilities that we can do our warfighting on. And you'll see a lot of that stuff out in the press and the things that we're trying to release there. And my job in the office of the CIO is to support those things. So whether or not it is the F-35 or the upcoming E-7 AWACS replacement or our ISR ecosystem, we are providing this baseline on which all capabilities are delivered, right? So there's no such thing as enterprise IT or warfighting IT. Warfighting is done on enterprise IT. So that's the kind of first strategic narrative that we're talking about. If you look at a couple of things, if you look at the broad arc of technology, it's only getting more complicated, and our operators are not getting any older. And so we have to jam more and more and more complexity and more institutional knowledge into an operator for them to be able to even have a technician level understanding of what's going on. And so for us, this means that we need to go more and more towards a strong enterprise-led set of IT delivery. And this is really, really challenging. The product and service management necessary to centralize, I know not everybody loves that word, but it's effectively what you're doing, to find that set of commoditized requirements is incredibly hard. In fact, enterprise IT is unlike many other deliverables and the way that we think about capability delivery in the military. Oftentimes you have this sense of like, oh, we have a requirement, whether or not it's this, tactical requirement or this, we need an air platform to fly this fast and use as much fuel and to be able to maneuver this amount, right? If you take that thinking, you can't deliver enterprise IT that way, because enterprise IT is the sum commoditization of all of your other mission sets. And so your customer management, your strategic communication, your strategic prioritization is an entirely different motion than your standard like A3, A5, which is our operations and kind of strategic planning, future warfighting type activities to generate requirements. That process breaks down when you have to go to every single stakeholder and say, okay, weather, what do you need for cloud computing? Okay, logistics, what do you need for cloud computing? Okay, intelligence, what do you need for cloud computing? And so it's a different motion altogether. And so the first vision is to continue to reform and optimize enterprise IT delivery to better align to that commoditization motion, because that is going to, over time, continue to simplify what's happening at the edge or the pointy end of the spear. And you see this through a lot of our existing IT efforts. So our enterprise IT as a service, or what we call ITaaS, we're doing things like centralizing help desks. We're doing things like transforming the way that we do local IT support for networking. Those things are key, largely because those platforms are getting more and more sophisticated over time, but also because when we look at the sort of national strategic military space, we want our airmen and guardians doing airmen and guardian specific things as much as possible, and not commodity IT elements. Those are things that could be even under warfighting constructs transition to contractors who are supporting it centrally and in an automated fashion with the deep institutional knowledge to make those things work. So we have to automate, we have to have these richer services, and we have to continue to find clever ways to enable the edge to consume those services. And so what this means from that's the sort of 50,000 foot view. In the 30,000 foot view, we've identified real key enablers that we think are important to get that done, right? And to begin the process of that modernization. And so we have things like our identity foundations. As we move towards richer identity, it's going to be the foundation for zero trust architectures. But getting people into modern identity constructs is a change both technically for underlying systems, but also kind of a change to business processes. And so building those service constructs for how we would enable, for instance, instead of you signing up with every single mission application, you would have a centralized place where you go and get access for things to do your job. And then eventually you're just automatically granted access for things to do your job. To get there requires us to change all of the business processes for how you sign up for those websites. That is digital transformation. It is the core of what digital transformation actually is. But for us to get that service out, there are 30 intermediate milestones for how you deliver the centralized product, how you onboard groups of customers, how you message to people about what they need to do to come on board to this. There's a lot of that service marketing even for what the future of that core piece of identity even looks like. So we have broken it down again to these like kind of core enablers that have all of this depth and all of these kind of intermediate milestones that we're trying to get people to conceptualize, to understand, and to be able to work through. So identity is really important to us. Cloud computing is really important to us. The next generation of access based around zero trust principles is really important to us, but you can think of it largely as eliminating the need for VPNs. There are also kind of the next generation of connectivity. So if you think of Maslow's hierarchy of technology, right, at the bottom, the first thing is resilient connectivity, right? If you can't get to your data, or you can't get to the compute platform where you have everything hosted, nothing else matters, right? And I'm not just like pandering to the classic comms community. Like it really is truly that important. And so for us, trying to figure out with our ABMS brethren and our enterprise brethren what the future of connectivity resilience looks like, and what that means from, commercial LEO, what that means for, host nation partner connectivity, what that means for cellular and 5G, how all of these new or new-ish things come into play so that we can describe a future and then work backwards from that future to get those milestones knocked out are really key. So we also have AI and a broad push for automation broadly under, you can think of AI as being of marketing and fancy buzzword over a whole umbrella of automated processes and other digital transformation and digital workforce enablement. So those are the broad pieces of it. But going back to that centralized message of we need to homogenize what we are doing. We need to reduce so there's this principle in cloud where the cloud is about providing these microservices and providing this shared set of responsibilities to its consumers, where the end goal is you only really need to deliver and provide the things that are most unique to your application. And we want to take that and have a similar approach to enterprise services for what we deliver in the department. And so that means, I don't want people doing their own identity. I don't want people doing their own log management. I don't want people doing their own access management. I want people doing their own non-person entity credentialing, right? There are all these little topics that are difficult to do today. And we want to shrink what each individual mission set, right? Each of our individual IT consumers and providers are responsible for, and there are thousands in the Air Force. We want to shrink that to the smallest kernel necessary, and that will help us drive security, drive good cost control, drive easier training because you have less variation, and over time help make the digital transformation of the military a lot more simple. So there are so many elements there to getting it right, and we are just trying to chip away at those big block services to get that right.
Yeah, and it's a great segue into some of the things you talked about, which is the narrative building, the ability to communicate it. And you just mentioned in your response, zero trust. So I was wondering if you can transition a little bit to the development, release, and progress to date of the Air Force's zero trust roadmap strategy. And one thing, you may have already said this, Jay, but why did you choose a roadmap approach to building this strategy out? And what can you tell us about the process you employed in developing the zero trust strategy and roadmap?
So when I came into this job, we were sort of tasked with figuring out the what, right? So the Pentagon is quite good at the how, right? There's a machine that does all the budgetary stuff, and there's a machine that does a lot of the policy stuff. But the place where I've been really asked to focus is on the what, right? We know how to do something once we decide what it is we're going to do. And so if I look at, take a look at the space, and I had a fair amount of familiarity because I worked with the Air Force for probably 3 or 4 years as a pretty close outsider. It was clear that there was not a broad plan. Zero trust breaks the military in such an interesting way because zero trust is not a product that you can stick in a PEO and just have the PEO. I think it's program executive officer. So it's a high-ranking military official who's in charge of a set of deliverables for a set of requirements. And you can't say, okay, we're just going to go buy zero trust. Instead, zero trust is this architectural imperative that touches hundreds of thousands of things, whether or not it's the endpoint to the network to like, what are you going to do about printers? What are you going to do about medical devices? What are you going to do about fire life safety, right? What are you going to do about each individual application? What are you going to do about your data platforms? So it has these broad implications for everything, and it requires us to express an architectural opinion over the 30 or so disparate programs that are delivering enterprise IT and then all of their consumers. And so the roadmap, the concept to say, okay, we're just gonna have to figure out where we're going, what our story is for all of these things that DoD is trying to tell us to do, but also, when we say zero trust when we say we want a zero trust architecture, that is going to mean something different for Cloud One, that is going to mean something different for Platform One, that is going to mean something different for Office 365, that is going to mean something different for the endpoint, that is going to mean something different for each of those different platforms. And we had to really contextualize it, break it down, and figure out what we're going to be able to get at. And we had told people for so long that zero trust was important that there were all these pilots going on, and there's still all these pilots going on for people who are trying all these different things, right? So Sustainment Center is doing one thing, and our nuclear enterprise is doing another thing. And how do all of these come together into a consistent end state where we can then understand the programmatic milestones to get there? And so we started off on this kind of just get our act together thing that became the roadmap. But what also started to be clear is as we look across the chain of IT delivery for the department, if you look left and say, the place where things are supposed to start are kind of in a strategy, and then they work their way through the POM process, which is how we get our budget. We go all the way through this, and we get to delivery where you have like a concept of operations and then acquisition documents. It was clear that two things were busted. First off, we were not always delivering. We didn't have a strategy written down for everything. So our institutional knowledge baseline was really pretty uneven. And then the delivery for execution meant that there were all of these interim homework steps that we just weren't tracking as an integrated part of delivery. And so it was key for us to kind of write those down and do the milestone tracking. And that's been one of the most illustrative things for us. So we keep all of our milestones, these intermediate milestones for the plan that we have developed over for zero trust, for now, for zero trust ICAM and networks. And we're working towards API and data access as the fourth one. But we're managing each of these milestones, like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of intermediate milestones. And we are endeavoring to update them every single quarter. And what this does is it keeps us accountable to progress. We try and do so publicly so people can see our current thinking and people can understand how we have broken things up and how we've talked about them. But then how we're able to get people who don't feel like they are in the critical path of delivery, to be able to do the homework and do the intermediate milestones to be able to deliver things on time. And that level of kind of whole of community delivery management, it's still nascent. It's going a lot better now that we're about a year into it, where we are working through the homework, but getting people to prioritize and focus on those things has been kind of one of the transformative things that we've worked on over the last couple of years. And the Zero Trust FMO under ACC are the folks who are really the tip of the spear for management of those things, as well as reporting up and down to DoD CIO. So it's been a huge, like, I like to think of the road mapping process as the digital transformation of the IT delivery ecosystem, because it forces you to focus and digitally track intermediate milestones in a way that provides leadership the data about how delivery is actually going. And like, even just writing down week by week, saying like, yeah, no progress is made because we're blocked on this, no progress is made because we're blocked on that. Even gathering that data about the delivery ecosystem has been illustrative about what's actually going on. And so it's been huge for us.
It's got to be revelatory for all the stuff that you're seeing.
Not in the best way. It's revelatory, but it's not always the best.
But it may be in a way to spin it in a positive way. At least now you know what the roadblocks are. If you didn't have this exercise, you'd be like, well, why is this happening?
And this is key for the Pentagon, right? The Pentagon does exist in a bubble, right? Where they don't always get a lot of outside inputs from the field, or if they do, it's for this very curated brief. And so having the data, the data that you can't argue with about where the holdup is, it's easy when you're in that bubble to form kind of these gut feeling narratives about why things aren't going well, right? Because you have limited data coming in, and you're trying to make a decision, and leaders want to be able to pull the levers of power to speed up delivery, but they're not always given the opportunity and the understanding to do the right thing, right? Is it money? Is it advocacy? Is it policy? Is it prioritization, right? All of these things the Pentagon can meaningfully provide, but without that data input, you're guessing. And that's been a huge thing, that trying to get people to focus in on the data residuals from delivery is so huge.
Jay, before I let you go, I was hoping I'd be remiss in not asking you about cloud and AI and what's going on in those areas. Could you give us maybe a high-level overview of what's happening with the cloud journey and maybe what you're doing around AI?
Sure. So the cloud journey for us is something that we're going to need to accelerate. So we're kind of thinking about this as, what does our next generation of cloud adoption look like? So we have about 110 elements inside of Cloud One. We have another set of kind of intelligence users who are in intelligence clouds, but those are the folks who are ready and willing to go. And so now that we are in kind of that second tier of folks who want to go to the cloud, the messaging is going to be shifting. So we have an upcoming cloud strategy that will be coming out that talks a little bit about the shift away from cloud as being a cost driver. So you've heard from a lot of folks like, oh, we're going to close down data centers, right? We're going to kind of consolidate into commercial cloud and commercial best practices. And all that is still true. But the reason to do that is not for cost reasons, right? You can make a not very feature-filled data center very cheaply. And so cloud is about resilience. And to change the messaging about how you embrace commercial cloud best practices for resilience, and then you can get cost control and scalability along the way. So that core change of messaging, and then how we drive the enablement for applications that are either not super well funded or not super technically ready, or kind of have an uncertain cloud future. How do we better create cloud guardrails and the pathway to the cloud in a way that makes that easier? That is the focus of the next cloud strategy as it comes through. And so we're going through internal cord on that now. At this point, we're probably going to expect it. Hopefully, it'll be public by the end of April. And then AI as well is an incredibly hot topic. The world had a lot of fun with ChatGPT over the last year, as we all just got acquainted with the with that whole set of technologies. AI is incredibly important to a number of things that we're delivering, whether or not it is inside of our core enterprise IT, inside of our knowledge work, inside of all of our data processing elements. It is a part of technical and organizational maturity to get there. And so we are trying to build those guardrails around how folks can adopt AI. So we've taken this huge push towards the ethical AI frameworks so that people can make the right decisions about how they consume AI products. Because AI is going to be built into everything. Again, it's an architectural imperative. It's not a thing you buy by itself anymore. And so how do we understand that we as the Department of Defense are driving ethical AI outcomes to make sure that they aren't biased, that they have appropriate consideration for automation, so human in the loop or on the loop, to be able to understandable, explainable, all of these qualities of AI. So we're building those frameworks. We have a lot of strong AI deployments today in a huge number of our systems. We are continuing to drive investment in those areas. And then we also want to make sure that we are meeting the demand, as we sort of talk about, Chat GPT, but there is a huge amount of automation of knowledge work that those types of platforms can enable. So trying to make sure that we have the right kind of GPT-ish guardrails around generative AI and its ability to, again, transmit ideas and information very quickly through an organization. We need to be able to embrace that and to be able to meet the demand of our force so that, again, if we aren't meeting demand for the tools that the enterprise should be providing, whether or not it's collaboration, whether or not it's, AI or generative AI, or whether or not it's, voice or even workable cloud guardrails, then things leak out of the enterprise. And we have this give and take between reality and kind of hard governance, where we have to kind of meet the field where they're at. So we're working very diligently to get those right guardrails out, and we're working with AFRL and a couple of other entities to pull together what we think right looks like. So more to come there, but it's going to be a huge part of everything that we do, as well as, cleaning up technical debt and making sure we have the right budgetary and people structure. So there's never short of things to do.
This has been the Business of Government Hour, a conversation with Jason Bonci, Chief Technology Officer at the U.S. Department of the Air Force. Be sure to join us next time for another informative, insightful, and in-depth conversation on improving government leadership and its effectiveness. Until then, subscribe, download, and listen to the entire interview at iTunes, Spotify, Audible, or on your favorite podcast app, and as always at businessofgovernment.org.